I folded the divorce decree in half as Daniel smiled like he'd won a prize. We were still on the courthouse steps, lawyers dispersing into the grey afternoon, when he slid his sunglasses on and said it light, almost casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Well," he exhaled, adjusting his cufflinks, "I guess that's that. You walk away clean. I keep the house, the company, the cars. You get—" "What? Your clothes?" He chuckled. "That's what a solid prenup does, Kira. You got nothing, but at least it's simple." The word nothing hit harder than the judge's final bang of the gavel. I kept my fingers steady around the folded papers, even as my pulse roared in my ears. Years of spreadsheets, late nights, and carefully negotiated contracts had trained me not to flinch when someone underestimated me. I had sat across from venture capitalists who mistook me for Daniel as assistant and still walked out with term sheets that favored us. Apparently, my own husband had been taking notes on all the wrong things. He leaned in as a black SUV pulled up to the curb for him. "Honestly, you'll be fine," he added, like he was granting me mercy. "You were always good at admin stuff. I'm sure you can find another job somewhere. And hey, no hard feelings, right?" He tapped the rolled decree against my arm, as if we were teammates who'd just lost a friendly game, then slid into the back seat without waiting for my answer. I watched the SUV merge into traffic, the tinted windows swallowing his profile. The breeze tugged at the hem of my blazer. The courthouse steps around me blurred into a wash of navy suits and muted voices. Nothing. It was almost funny. If I hadn't known better, if I hadn't been there for every decision, every late-night spreadsheet, every wire transfer, I might have believed him. But there was one thing Daniel had never learned about me in 7 years of marriage. I never signed anything I hadn't read twice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. I walked to my car like a ghost moving through someone else's life. The parking structure hummed with engines and distant horns, the concrete cool under my heels. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. Silence wrapped around me, thick and fragile. Only then did I let my hands shake. I laid the decree on the passenger seat and smoothed it open. My name, Kira Ladd, looked small next to his on the first page, swallowed by paragraphs of legal language that carved our life into neat, separate piles. The judge had upheld the prenup. Of course he had. It was thorough, professionally drafted, signed, and notarized before we walked down the aisle. Daniel had insisted on it back then, with a charming grin and a half-joking, "It's just good business, babe. You know how founders have to protect their equity." Back then, I'd been running a boutique financial consulting firm out of a co-working space, managing other people's chaos for a living. I'd looked at him, at the spreadsheets of our future, and said, "If we do this, it protects both of us." He'd heard, "It protects me." He hadn't listened to the rest. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A flurry of messages lit up the screen. Naomi, my lawyer and oldest friend. A missed call from my mother. A group chat ping from an old college thread I'd forgotten to mute. Naomi. Asterisk asterisk, call me when you can. We need to talk through next steps. Next steps. There was something strangely comforting about the phrase. It sounded like a project plan, not the ruins of a marriage. I took a breath, counted to 4, and forced my mind into the same mode I used when a client's books were a disaster, and the tax deadline was in 48 hours. Pain gives analysis, gives decision, gives action. Step 1. Accept the data. Daniel believed I had nothing. His lawyer believed I had nothing. The court, for now, believed I had nothing. Step 2. Verify the data. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, worn folder. The edges were soft from years of being shoved between books and binders, moved from one apartment to another. from one safe to another. The original prenup, not a scan. Not a summarized version. The full 7-page document Naomi and I had drafted together at her kitchen table, years before Daniel and I said our vows. The one he'd signed without reading everything, because his best man was honking outside and his mother was crying about us being late to the rehearsal dinner. I didn't open it there in the car. Some documents deserve better lighting than a gloomy parking structure. Instead, I started the engine and drove to the one place that, for the past decade, had made me feel like myself even when my life was burning down. My office. Technically, it wasn't mine anymore, not in the way it used to be. 2 years into our marriage, Daniel had convinced me to merge my consultancy into his startup. It'll be a family venture, he'd said, wrapping his arms around my waist while I was still in my blazer, laptop open on the counter. We'll be co-founders. You bring the systems. I bring the big picture. Co-founders look nice on pitch decks. Only one of us had ever been listed as CEO. The co-working space. I still kept a membership that had become my refuge during the divorce. A floating desk, a locker, access to a printer that never asked me how I was feeling. I parked, climbed the stairs, and nodded at the barista who already knew my bad day order. Black coffee, no sugar, no questions. At an empty table by the window, I laid out the papers like a surgeon prepping instruments. Divorce decree on the left, prenup on the right. I started with the decree, reading line by line. Separate property, marital assets, waiver of spousal support, the judge's ruling in favor of enforcing the prenup, the notation that disputes regarding the company's valuation and distribution would be handled in a separate proceeding, if needed, as if my entire professional life were a rounding error. I moved to the prenup, fingers steady now. Page 1. Definitions. Names, addresses, the usual boilerplate. Page 2. Disclosure of assets. His pre-existing company shares, more dream than value back then. His student loan debt. My consulting practice, modest savings. The rental apartment my grandmother had left me. Page 3. Waiver of future claims to each other's separate property. Page 4. Treatment of marital earnings. A joint account for shared expenses, each of us maintaining personal accounts beyond that. Page 5. Provisions for spousal support mutual waiver. Page 6. Signatures. His, mine, the witnesses, the notary. And then there was page 7. I turned it over like a card in a game no one else at the table realized we were playing. Addendum. Protection of premarital investment in future business ventures. I almost smiled. Naomi had insisted on that section. You're fronting him the first 50 grand, she'd said back then, stirring sugar into her tea. That's not just love. That's investment. We are not calling that a wedding gift. On page 7, in Naomi's precise legal language, we'd laid it out. Asterisk asterisk in consideration of the undersigned party, Kira Ladd, investing premarital funds into any current or future enterprise, founded by or co-founded with the undersigned party. Daniel Price. The parties agree as follows, asterisk asterisk 1. Recognition of equity contribution. Asterisk asterisk any premarital funds invested by Kira into Daniel. Business ventures shall be treated as an equity investment at a valuation, mutually determined in writing at the time of investment. 2. Protection upon dissolution of marriage. Asterisk asterisk. In the event of dissolution of the marriage initiated by Daniel, or precipitated by material breach of marital fidelity by Daniel, Kira shall be entitled to no less than 35% of Daniel's interest in any such enterprise, or an equivalent cash-out based on the most recent bona fide valuation. 3. Non-waiver. Asterisk asterisk. This clause shall not be superseded or negated by any subsequent waivers of spousal support or claims to separate property. His signature sat at the bottom of the page, dark and looping, as if he'd had all the time in the world when he signed. I traced the ink with my eyes, remembering the way he'd rushed that night, his phone buzzing with texts from his friends, his mother hovering in the hallway, asking if we were really going through with this legal nonsense. "It's just paperwork," he'd said, winking at me. "Naomi's good. I trust you." He'd signed. He'd never read. And neither, apparently, had the lawyer he'd hired for the divorce, who'd been given a scanned copy missing the handwritten note Naomi had made in blue ink on the original. Asterisk asterisk see attached valuation memo. Exhibit A asterisk asterisk. I reached into the folder and pulled out a thinner stapled packet. Exhibit A valuation memo for our first round of funding. It was dated 4 years ago, back when my $50,000 transfer from my rental sale had been the difference between his company folding and surviving long enough to raise a seed round. Back when he'd brought me flowers and said, "You believed in me when no one else did." Back when I still believed those words meant we were partners. My phone buzzed again. "Naomi." This time I answered. "You read it?" she asked. No hello needed between us. "I read it," I said. "They upheld the prenup." "Of course they did," she replied. "We drafted it too well. That was always the plan." I glanced at page 7. Daniel thinks I walked away with nothing. There was a pause on the line, the kind where I could practically hear Naomi choosing which truth to hand me first. "Do you want me to be your friend or your lawyer right now?" she asked. "Both," I said. My voice surprised me with how steady it was. "As your friend," she said, "he's an idiot. As your lawyer, he's still an idiot. But he's an idiot who signed a document that says you own 35% of his Golden Boy company if he screws this up. And he already screwed it up. They didn't mention this in court," I said, flipping the pages again as if the words might rearrange themselves. His attorney kept talking about separate property, about protecting his equity. The judge just referenced the summary. "Because his attorney didn't do his homework," Naomi said. "We only needed today's hearing to confirm the prenup stands. The enforcement of page 7. That's a separate proceeding. And trust me, Kira, we're going to have it." My heart, which had been lodged somewhere between my throat and my ribcage all afternoon, shifted, not lighter, just repositioned. "They think I have nothing," I said slowly. "Good," Naomi replied. "Let them keep thinking that. You do your best work when people underestimate you." She wasn't wrong. In college, professors had assumed I was in the wrong classroom when I signed up for advanced financial modeling. At my first job, a senior partner had asked me to take notes in a meeting where I ended up correcting his projections in front of a client. Every time someone had tried to shrink me, I'd learned to fold their assumptions into fuel. This time, the stakes were simply larger. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Documentation," Naomi said. "Proof of the original investment, proof of his breach, and patience. We'll file to enforce the clause. It won't be fast, but it will be clean." Proof of his breach. I thought of the late-night message I'd found months ago on his iPad, the one he'd left open on the kitchen counter as he showered. The message from R from marketing, who was not just brainstorming campaigns at midnight. The hotel receipts. The whispered phone calls on the balcony when he thought I was asleep. I'd taken screenshots back then, not out of strategy but out of self-preservation. A woman trying to convince herself she wasn't hallucinating. Now, those fragments would become something else. Receipts. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, Please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The next week became a quiet excavation. By day I worked. The divorce decree didn't change the fact that clients still needed budgets reviewed and cash flows modeled. Numbers were merciful that way, indifferent to heartbreak. By night, I turned my tiny apartment into a war room. I printed bank statements showing the sale of my grandmother's apartment and the incoming wire to Daniel's fledgling company account, labeled Initial Seed Investment. I dug up the original email chain with the subject line, **, re. Funding transfer. Let's make this real. **, his reply had been full of promise. **, you won't regret this. When this blows up, we'll buy you a whole building in your grandmother's honor. I wondered, briefly, if he even remembered writing that. Screenshots from his iPad went into another folder. Text between him and Raina, the marketing director with the too bright laugh. Hotel confirmations overlapping with conferences I hadn't been invited to. A selfie of the two of them clinking glasses in a lobby bar, timestamped 40 minutes after he'd told me he was exhausted and going to bed early. Naomi and I met twice a week in her office, a glass-walled cube overlooking the city. We don't need drama, she reminded me, flipping through the pages. We just need facts. He initiated the divorce. We have evidence of his infidelity. We have documented proof of your premarital investment. The clause is clear. He's going to say it's unfair, I said. He's going to say whatever his ego needs him to say, she replied. Fairness is not the standard. The standard is enforceability, and he had every opportunity to read this before he signed. We rehearsed. Naomi walked me through what to say and what not to say at the upcoming settlement conference. She warned me about the tactics his attorney might use, minimizing my role, painting my investment as supportive wife behavior, instead of a formal contribution. They'll try to push emotional buttons, she said. Your job is to remember you're not his wife in that room. You're an investor enforcing a contract. The words settled over me like armor. An investor enforcing a contract. Not a woman begging to be acknowledged. The first time Daniel texted after the hearing, it was a photo. A group of his friends at a bar, glasses raised. The caption, **, freedom tastes expensive. My finger hovered over the keyboard, replies forming and dissolving like foam. I typed, **, good. You can afford it. **, then I deleted it. He didn't need my reactions. He needed my silence. When he called a week later, it was 11:37 p.m. I watched his name light up my phone as I sat on the floor surrounded by stacks of paper. I let it go to voicemail. His voice came through, tinny and slightly slurred. Kira, come on, he said. We don't have to be enemies. You know the prenup. You know the deal. You're smart. You'll land on your feet. This is just clean. Clean. I glanced at the screenshot of him and Raina in the hotel bar and wondered how he managed to use that word without choking on it. I didn't call back. Every time he reached out after that, with friendly texts, with photos of our old dog he'd kept, with invitations to talk like adults, I forwarded screenshots to Naomi and archived the thread. Pressure built quietly. His mother called my mother, lecturing her about loyalty. Friends chose sides, some too polite to say it out loud, others more direct in their private messages. **, you knew who he was when you married him. Don't drag this out. **, is this really about the money? You were never that type. **, there it was, the old wound, dressed in new language. You were never the type to want more. They'd mistaken my restraint for smallness. They'd mistaken my silence for agreement. They'd mistaken my love for a willingness to disappear. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late spring. I woke before my alarm, brain already cataloguing steps before my feet hit the floor. Shower. Coffee. Black dress, the one Naomi called my boardroom armor. Hair pulled back. Gold stud earrings, nothing dangling, nothing that could be fiddled with. On the kitchen counter, next to my keys, I laid out the folder one more time. Prenup. Exhibitor proof of investment. Proof of breach. I stood there for a moment, fingers resting on the cover, feeling the familiar swell of nerves that always rose before a big pitch meeting. This wasn't a pitch. It was a reckoning. We met in a downtown office tower I'd helped negotiate a lease for 2 years earlier, back when Daniel and I still shared a calendar and a bed. Now, his company's logo gleamed on the wall behind the reception desk, sharp and expensive. The receptionist knew, young, assessing me with the quick glance of someone trying to place a face from an internal memo, offered a careful smile. "They're expecting you in Conference B," she said. Naomi arrived at my side, a folder of her own tucked under her arm. Her lipstick was a shade redder than usual, her version of a battle flag. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for 3 years," I said. We walked down the hallway together. Conference B was all glass and steel and understated wealth. Daniel sat at the far end of the table, his posture relaxed in a way that told me he'd already decided this was a formality. His attorney, a man with a perfect tie and a practiced frown, sat to his right. To his left, one of his board members, the same man who had once mistaken me for catering staff at a launch party, scrolled through his phone. They stood as we entered. The choreography of professionalism. "Kira," Daniel said, voice warm, as if we were running into each other at a farmer's market. "You look good." "Mr. Price," Naomi said, bypassing the small talk as she took her seat. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a stack of color-coded tabs, cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Our goal today is to see whether we can reach an agreement regarding the enforcement of the prenuptial agreement and the division of relevant assets without further litigation." Daniel's attorney launched into his opening like he'd been rehearsing it in the mirror. He talked about Daniel's vision and years of hard work, about the risk he'd taken as a founder, about the importance of protecting entrepreneurial incentive. He acknowledged, in a tone that suggested he was doing me a favor, that I'd been supportive and helpful in the early days. "However," he concluded, "the prenup clearly establishes that the company is Daniel's separate property. Ms. Ladd waived any claims to that property upon dissolution of the marriage. In the interest of goodwill, my client is prepared to offer a lump sum payment as a gesture of appreciation so we can all move on." He slid a sheet of paper across the table toward Naomi. She glanced at it, then turned it so I could see. The number was insulting. I de-billed more than that in a quarter, before Daniel's first product demo had even shipped. I looked up at him. Daniel watched me with that familiar mix of charm and condescension, like a man waiting for a child to accept a toy. "We both know you're smart," he said softly, as if we were alone. "Take it, start fresh. Pain, analysis, decision, action." I folded my hands on the table. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my voice calm. "But there seems to be a misunderstanding about the prenup." His attorney's brows knit. "We've reviewed the document thoroughly," he said. "The court has already upheld it." Naomi opened our folder. "You've reviewed the summary," she said, "and the scanned copy you submitted, which, interestingly, did not include page 7 of the original executed agreement." Silence slid into the room like a shadow. "Page 7? Daniel repeated. I watched his face as the words landed, the slightest flicker of doubt crossing his features. He didn't remember. Of course he didn't. Naomi slid the original prenup across the table, open to the final page. "This is the document both parties signed," she said. Notarized, witnessed. As you'll see, there's an addendum titled Protection of Premarital Investment in Future Business Ventures. The mediator leaned forward, reading. Daniel's attorney took the document, lips moving slightly, as he scanned the lines I knew by heart now. Recognition of equity contribution. Protection upon dissolution of marriage. Non-waiver. 35%. This wasn't in the copy we received, he said slowly. It was in the original, Naomi replied, which we provided at the time of signing and again during discovery. If your office chose not to review it in full, that doesn't negate its enforceability. Daniel reached for the document, eyes skimming the page. I watched the moment he recognized his own signature at the bottom, his name looping confidently under terms he clearly didn't remember agreeing to. Color drained from his face. This clause, his attorney said, voice tightening, is contingent upon premarital funds being invested and upon a breach of marital fidelity or divorce initiated by Mr. Price. We dispute both. Naomi slid another folder forward. Exhibit A, she said, her tone almost gentle. Documentation of Ms. Ladd's transfer of $50,000 from the sale of her premarital property into Mr. Price's company account, dated prior to marriage. Memo line. Initial seed investment. Email correspondence confirming valuation at the time. Board minutes referencing her as an early investor. The board member looked up at that, eyes narrowing. I don't recall, he began. Naomi tapped a highlighted line in the minutes. Here, she said, where you thanked KL for keeping the lights on. He fell silent. As for the breach, Naomi continued, sliding the next set of pages over, we have hotel receipts, timestamp messages, and photographic evidence of Mr. Price engaging in an extramarital relationship with an employee while still married to Ms. Ladd. We are prepared to present these in court if necessary. She paused. We would prefer not to, for the sake of everyone's dignity. Daniel's jaw clenched. This is, he started, but the words seemed to fail him. Unfair? He'd said that about the suggestion that we split chores once. Ungrateful? He de-used that when I hesitated to put more of my savings into his second product pivot. He'd always had words when I was smaller in the equation. Now, with the numbers in front of him, he had none. The mediator folded her hands. Mr. Price, she said, voice steady. Given the evidence presented and the clear language of the clause in question, I would strongly advise you to consider negotiating in good faith. If this proceeds to court, it is highly probable that Ms. Ladd's claim to a significant share of your company will be upheld. The room felt strangely still. Outside the glass walls, I could see employees moving through the hallway, laughing, carrying laptops and coffee cups, oblivious to the small earthquake happening in Conference B. Daniel looked at me finally not as his former assistant, or his supportive wife, or the convenient background to his spotlight. He looked at me like someone who had just realized the foundation under his feet bore my fingerprints. You knew about this, he said quietly. I drafted it with Naomi, I replied. Years ago, when I sold my grandmother's apartment to fund your idea. I told you we were protecting both of us. You never said. I did, I said, still calm. You just didn't listen. The board member cleared his throat. Daniel, he murmured, we should talk. His attorney scribbled notes, already recalculating. The mediator suggested a break. We stepped out into the hallway. Daniel followed me a few minutes later, catching up near the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city. Kira, he said, voice low. 35%? Are you trying to destroy me? I turned to him. You destroyed us, I said. This is me refusing to disappear with you. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture once endearing, now just familiar. I thought you didn't care about the money, he said. like that was the moral high ground. I don't, I said. I care about what the money represents. Time, work, belief. Don't get to rewrite that just because you've decided the story is over. For a moment the mask slipped. The charm, the practiced ease gone. What was left was a man who had never expected the woman beside him to be better at the game he taught her to play. "What do you want?" he asked. I thought of the lump sum offer on the table, the insult hidden in a gesture of appreciation, the years of being called, organized instead of brilliant, supportive instead of essential. "I want what's mine," I said. No more, no less. Negotiations dragged into the afternoon. By the time we signed the tentative agreement, Daniel's offer had changed shape. 35% equity, vested immediately. A buyout option at a fair market valuation if either party chose to sever ties. Formal recognition of my role as a founding investor and operations architect in the company's official history. It wasn't revenge. It was math catching up to reality. Weeks later, the court approved the settlement. Naomi took me out for dinner at the small Italian place we used to haunt when we were broke and ambitious. "You know you could just cash out and move to an island," she said, twirling pasta on her fork. "Maybe," I said. "But I think I have a different use for this, because somewhere between the courthouse steps and Conference B, something had shifted. For years, I'd used my talents to scale other people's visions, professors, partners, clients, my husband. I'd told myself it was safer that way. Less risky, less exposed. But sitting in that glass room, watching a man built on bravado crumble in the face of a clause he de-signed without reading, I'd felt something unlock in my chest. I wasn't just good at admin stuff. I was good at seeing the whole board. At the end of the quarter, the board formally acknowledged my stake. My inbox filled with brief, carefully worded emails from investors. Asterisk, looking forward to working together. Asterisk, asterisk, we hadn't realized the extent of your involvement. Asterisk, recognition after the fact is a strange kind of apology. I accepted it, but I didn't mistake it for gratitude. Instead, I scheduled 3 meetings. One with a venture capitalist who'd once told me, over canapes, that he invested in founders with sharp instincts. One with a former client whose supply chain chaos I'd untangled years ago. And one with a quiet, brilliant engineer from Daniel's company who'd resigned the week after the divorce became public. "I heard what happened," she said when we met at a coffee shop, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. "I didn't want to build someone else's ego anymore." "Me neither," I said.